The real state of the union. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt, and I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. Joe Biden, President Joe Biden, another State of the Union, his second State of the Union, talking about unity. Remember Joe Biden, the great unifier? He pledged to unite the nation, unite the country, unite us all, Republicans and Democrats alike. And in the lead up to his State of the Union this time around, there were headlines about how he met with Speaker Kevin McCarthy behind closed doors, and they're united, they're together, they've pledged to work together. Honestly, that's bad news for conservatives, because whenever Republicans on Capitol Hill pledge to unify with Democrats and work together with Democrats and cooperate with Democrats, that's code for cave to Democrats. Remember John Boehner with the debt ceiling, constantly caving to Barack Obama, constantly caving to the Democrat will? That's what cooperation means in the eyes of Democrats. Caving, cowering, giving in. So it's not great news when you have a Republican coming forward and saying, hey, I'm going to work with Joe Biden. We're working together. We're all together in this. Because guess what? We all know Democrats are not really all in for America. So how do you work with that? How do you work with anti-American forces when you yourself are pro-American? Before I get into all that, I want to quickly mention, if you like Bold and Blunt, you can get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, the online platform for your faith-based podcast. You can get Bold and Blunt at washingtontimes.com. You can subscribe to it there. That's right, get it delivered right to your email box. Just go to the bottom of the washingtontimes.com webpage, find the newsletter section, click on it, find my section, newsletter section, click on it, and sign up for my 3 times a week newsletter delivered right to your email box. Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, you will get all my commentaries that I write all day long, all week long, all month long, all year long at the Washington Times, giving you the bullet points you need to fight the far leftist Marxists that masquerade as Democrats in the Democrat Party. And as a bonus, you get my twice weekly Bold and Blunt podcast as well. But guess what? You can also get Bold and Blunt wherever podcasts are offered. Just go to Google or Bing, type in Bold and Blunt podcast, and look at all the places where you can sign up for it, where you can get it delivered right to your email box. And if you're already a listener, guess what? Special thank you to you. Really appreciate the support. The real State of the Union. Here we are, February 2023. We've got Chinese spy balloons flying overhead, and we've got the Pentagon turning a blind eye to them until some farmer out in Montana notices, hey, what's that thing in the sky? And then brings it to the attention of the White House, and then, Karine Jean-Pierre, KJP, however you pronounce her name, I can never get it straight, comes forward and says, What balloons? These all came from the Donald Trump administration. So says an anonymous source within the U.S. military ranks. We don't know who. And then the mainstream media run with it. Nothing to see here. Nothing at all. China's spying on America? Just sending spy balloons over our military bases? It happens. What are you going to do about it? Well, if you're Joe Biden, you wait until your military commanders tell you it's safe to shoot down the balloon when it flies out over the ocean. And a full week after it's been floating the friendly skies of America, because, of course, the skies under this Joe Biden administration certainly are friendly for the communists, anyhow. For those who don't want to take the vaccine, not so friendly, but for the communists, very friendly. So they shoot the balloon down, and now we are all busily watching this White House do damage control and pretend as if no big deal, nothing to see here. That is just one item overshadowing this administration. But how about inflation? How about the economy? Look at these headlines. Fox News. Record number of Americans say they are worse off under Joe Biden. That's from Fox News. And that's just in the hours before his State of the Union. But look at this from CNN. If anybody carries the president's water, it's CNN. This headline: Biden is in a weak position heading into the State of the Union. That's an understatement. But coming from CNN, that's hugely significant. Because if there were any way that CNN could spin Joe Biden's poll numbers as positives to showcase him in a very adoring light with the American public, CNN would do it. So for CNN to put out a headline in just a couple hours before he takes to the national stage for his State of the Union, to put in a headline that he is in a weak position heading into the State of the Union, that's a sit up and take notice headline. Because when the Democrats, when the leftists, when the Marxists that masquerade as unbiased members of the press have to put a negative spin on Joe Biden, that it's probably about a bazillion times even more negative than what that mainstream media is putting out. State of the Union addresses are supposed to be a high mark of sorts for a president, CNN writes. The president has the nation's attention as he describes his accomplishments and agenda going forward. And while President Biden will certainly do those things, he still faces a tall task. Well, I'm not so sure, as CNN says, that President Biden will certainly do those things in regards to describing his accomplishments, because what are they? What are Joe Biden's accomplishments? And I'm not alone in asking that question, because guess what? Back to CNN's piece. 3 polls released in the past few days regarding how Americans view the job Biden is doing as president all basically say the same negative thing. Why? Let me answer that. Because Americans aren't being taken in by the White House lies that says Joe Biden is doing a great, excellent, amazing job as president. As CNN writes, Biden's poll numbers, both in terms of his approval rating and his 2024 prospects, continue to be lackluster heading into the beginning of the 2024 primary season. Lackluster? Talk about nosedives. ABC News, Washington Post, AP/NORC, and CBS News/YouGov polls all have Biden's approval rating in the low to mid 40s. That means his disapproval rating is in the mid to high 50s. How's he going to run for re-election with poll numbers that poor? The best polls, CNN writes, that Biden has received. You gotta laugh at what CNN puts in the parentheses after this. Let me just read it right from the website. The best polls that Biden has received, parentheses, and that meet CNN standards for publication, end parentheses, over the past few weeks still have Biden's disapproval rating above his approval rating. That's hilarious. That meets CNN standards for publication. What standard? What standard is that? Because standards in the media these days seem to be an anonymous source says. I mean, that's what's going on in the media right now, painting Donald Trump's administration as being the responsible party for allowing Chinese spy balloons over America, right? An anonymous source says. An anonymous source with the Pentagon said. No matter that every administration official affiliated with Donald Trump's White House has come forward and said, it's a lie, on record, right? Publicly pronouncing it, that it's a lie. That doesn't matter. An anonymous source says, and so it must be true because it dings the previous administration while buoying up the present administration. The best polls that Biden has received and that meet CNN standard for publication. That is a little bit of humor going into the State of the Union. As far as what Joe Biden puts out for his accomplishments for his last couple years in office, pretty much all lies, spins, deceptions. For instance, claiming a reduction of the budget by 1.4 trillion. How is that a reduction when under Joe Biden's administration, the deficit, the national debt, has risen by double that, by more than double that, by 4 point something trillion, 4.2 trillion, I think is the mark. This White House does the same thing with inflation. They do the same thing with anything economic. They talk about how they've reduced this or they've increased that. And they do everything they can to twist and turn over truths, over uncomfortable truths. Because the fact is, when there is a positive movement in the Joe Biden White House economy, it only comes on the heels of record-setting negative movement in the Joe Biden economy. They ratchet up inflation to historic levels. And then when inflation numbers finally drop, even just a tiny bit, they go out there and tout how they've lowered inflation. They kill the economy, and then when it shows just a tiniest of tell of a bounce back, they take to the national stage and pat themselves on the back and talk about how they have actually created a positive for the economy. And more than that, they expect you to do that too. They expect your memory to be so short that you can't remember times under just Donald Trump before Joe Biden had time to do his economic damage, that you can't remember just a couple years back when the economy was chugging along, when jobs were good, when inflation levels were low, when people had confidence to go to the stores and purchase things, in part because there were actually things on the store shelves to purchase. There were no supply chain issues that were just holding up baby diapers and formula and so forth. That was all Joe Biden, and he expects you to forget about that. And so here we go, State of the Union, Joe Biden, more lies, more deceit. And my guest today has some really interesting insights into how deceptive this White House has become, blatant, boldly, in part because the media cheers him right along with the lies. My guest is Vince Coglianese. He is host of the Vince Coglianese Show. It runs 3 to 6 p.m. on WMAL in the Washington, D.C. region, wedged right in between the Dan Bongino Show and the Mark Levin Show. And Vince is one of the smartest political commentators out there. So I'm very happy to have him weigh in on the State of the Union, the real State of the Union, which may surprise you, might be a little bit different from what this White House puts out as the State of the Union. Vince, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
Such a pleasure. Thank you very much, Cheryl.
So let's talk State of the Union. When you look out at America right now, the last couple years of Joe Biden, what are you seeing in terms of economy, culture, education, anything along those lines?
I just see a lot of chaos. Unfortunately, just a lot of chaos. I don't see order. And you can look kind of everywhere to detect this. You can look at the border, where we've had upwards of 3+ million people just over the course of a single year cross illegally into our country. You can look at the schools, where parents are having to fight just to get a normal education for their children, not an extraordinary one. It used to be that we demanded excellence. Now we just want normalcy. We want to keep the sex out of the schools. We're trying to keep the kids in the classrooms, and we want our daughters to be able to go to the appropriate bathroom, and vice versa, the boys as well. It's just amazing what these fights have become. We're fighting to keep our gas stoves in our houses. It's just gotten more and more preposterous with each passing day, and that's because I think the country is moving in a direction that you have been warning about for a long time, which is away from liberty and away from respecting the individual rights of people. And I think too many Americans have become conditioned to kind of accept their serfdom, that they live to serve the government, and that the government and these corporate powers are the ones to whom we have to turn in order to govern our lives. And in the process, they've abandoned so much of the American spirit. So I'm really troubled about the state of our season. I don't think things are headed in the right direction. And I'm hoping at some point we reach the breaking point where enough people can open their eyes and say, wow, how did this happen? And how can we turn things around?
And what will that breaking point look like? And look, you've been warning about this yourself for a very long time, which is one of the main reasons I love listening to you on WMAL, where I live. And one of the things that you just said, you said so much we could delve deeper into, but one of the things you just said, I think, cuts to kind of the core of what's taking place. Have we lost our love of liberty in America? What's going on? I know our younger generation gets fed propaganda in schools, but still, shouldn't they love individual liberties?
I think we have, and this is really troubling. I don't know if everyone's lost it. I think there are definitely many Americans who still really value it and will speak up about it, and you should, by the way. Language is super important, and I didn't know this when I was younger. I didn't appreciate this, but with each passing year, I start to realize how important it is to keep your vocabulary intact and your ability to think clearly about the country and to know your country's history. Because if you can do those things, then you'll be equipped to actually push back against the tyranny. But the goal right now is to deprive Americans of that language. The constant fights over what words you can use, what words you can't use, the dictionary itself changing definitions, Webster's releasing, changes. It's all a mind control effort. It's all quite literally designed to take away from Americans their ability to think clearly about liberty and their relationship with their government. And I think the big thing that's happened this century that has really conditioned Americans to be okay with being ruled over, more okay with it, is one, the emergence of the internet as the primary means for us to consume information and to communicate, how convenient our lives have become as a result of all of those products, how we basically, turned over responsibility for thinking about things to these machines. And as a result, you're not equipped with all of the basics that our ancestors were, because they had to be so self-reliant because they didn't have such overwhelming convenience. So there's that. And then there's the reality, kind of the never-ending existential crises. And you and I just had a conversation about this last week on my radio program.
Yep.
The government is constantly putting before us the latest existential crisis, which is, the climate is about to be destroyed unless we hand the government immense power, or you are going to be wiped out by a pandemic unless you hand the government immense power. And so it seems with each passing week, there's another crisis that's put before us where the only answer is more government power. And you have to do it now, and if you don't do it now, you're a bad person, or you're going to lead to the destruction of our country or our species. And so this never-ending cascade of crises combined with our lack of self-reliance has really primed not only the world population, but in particular the United States of America to surrender liberty and to sort of sleepwalk into that tyranny.
And then here's how that sort of third tier that you mentioned about taking the language and redefining it fits into that. Do you remember how Joe Biden was coming out and saying during the coronavirus that if you didn't get the shot, if you didn't wear face masks, it wasn't patriotic? Be a patriot, get the shot and so forth. So when you look at that, when you add in the corrupting of the language and redefining of words that used to mean something in America and now they're being twisted to mean something exactly opposite, it really does look a little dark out there, doesn't it?
Yes, and that form of moral blackmail is used to hurt you. It's interesting. Think about the Patriot Act was passed after 9/11, presumably to stop terrorist threats so that we wouldn't have 3,000 more Americans killed. Right. But it was turned against the American public. It's called the Patriot Act. How could you be opposed to the Patriot Act? And it was designed, or at least it equipped the government with tools that they did use against American citizens. That's not patriotic. That's tyrannical, and a deprivation of our liberty. You just had on Martin Luther King Day, Joe Biden go down to Ebenezer Baptist Church and give a speech about how fewer Americans should have access to guns on Martin Luther King Day. Martin Luther King's legacy was civil rights and civil liberties. Biden is appropriating his memory to call for the removal of rights of American citizens and saying that that's patriotic. Martin Luther King was deprived a concealed carry permit because of the color of his skin by the government. And so this is all, it's amazing how frequently this story plays out. I can just, all you have to do is change a couple of the proper nouns, and it happens all the time. You're constantly being told something is good for you by your government, that if you don't support it, you're not a patriot, and the thing that's good for you is always at your expense. It's always about taking your liberty away rather than protecting those freedoms.
And you know what? Even people who weren't political, right, or who aren't political, used to be able to identify these encroachments on individual liberties because of just simple cultural things, such as it used to be required reading. When I was in high school, you would read Animal Farm by George Orwell, 1984 by George Orwell, The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand, right? And so you would have that as kind of a backdrop. So even if you weren't political, you could see these intrusions into your liberties as they unwound in modern life.
Yes, no, that's true. And there's two dystopian visions of the future, maybe even present, that I would say that people should think about. And one is Orwell's 1984, and Orwell is speaking about open acts of aggression. It's basically tyrannically pounding into you your subservience to the government. Right, he said I forget the phrase, like if you want to think of, is it fascism? Think of a boot stamping on your face or
yes.
stamping on your face over and over. I'm mangling the quote now. But essentially, that's what tyranny looks like to Orwell. There's also Aldous Huxley in Brave New World.
Right.
And in Brave New World is a lot more like what we're experiencing now, which is people kind of being lulled into complacency and allowing tyranny to take place. In that framework, it was through drugs, the government drugging people and basically, making them feel like they embrace their tyranny, that they think it's preferable to their prior existence. And I think all of those things are kind of happening in concert, both Huxley's vision and Orwell's vision for where we're headed. Certainly, a couple years ago I was more libertarian, for instance, on like marijuana laws. And like, oh, it's fine, it doesn't bother anybody. But what's happened since is it's amazing that all the people who are demanding more control over your life, especially the leftist tyrants, are also the same people who are trying to enable more pot smoking nationwide. And you can't help but think that those two things are paired up in this way.
Right.
Which is the more complacent the populace is, the less likely they are to hold you accountable for your tyranny.
Yeah, it's why when elderly are put in nursing homes, their caretakers always want to drug them up to keep them quiet, right?
Yes,
basically.
Yes, exactly right. And we know now that there's tremendous abuse doing that very thing.
So when you look at Joe Biden, to what degree do you think he is purposely ushering in a time in America where we are crumbling rapidly in terms of our constitutional rights, in terms of our God-given rights? And to what degree do you think it's just because he's feckless and he's a puppet?
I think he has no respect for individual liberty and for defending things like religious liberty or any of the things that we hold dear. Certainly the Second Amendment, the First Amendment. Just going down the list, actually, I'm not convinced that he would passionately defend any amendment. But that's, in fact, he actually has used the phrase, no amendment is absolute.
Yes.
To be quite honest. So he's not a big fan of the Bill of Rights. I think Joe Biden is a career politician who is high on his own fumes. He loves power. He came in with one of the thinnest congressional majorities that any president has ever had. He had a tied Senate and a tie-breaking vote by virtue of his vice president and a very slim margin in the House. And he interpreted that as an FDR-scale mandate for change in the country. That is not what the voters elected. That is not what they put in office. And yet he decided that he would go for broke. And that's certainly where we're headed. I mean, the debt is now well above $31 trillion. One of the first acts he did was to pass a $1.7 trillion spending package that literally just injected cash into the economy for no reason other than to try and take credit for sending out checks. The effect of that was dramatic inflation is the reason why. It's one of the huge reasons, actually, why people are paying so much more for so many products. It's out of control that, I think people notice this, whether they notice everything else, they notice how much more they're paying for things like eggs, for instance, which is like a normal, cheap staple in terms of your diet and getting protein into your life. All of that. I just don't think he cares how reckless he is. I think he's daffy. I think he's losing it in a lot of meaningful ways. But in the end, it's all about him, and it's about how he sees himself. Think about this. I just read this New York Times piece this morning about how Kamala Harris is, like a loser and nobody knows what to do about her, and on and on and on. But one of the things that stuck out to me in the piece is the same thing that sticks out to me about Joe Biden, is these people cannot stop meeting with presidential historians. Have you noticed this? They meet with like Doug Brinkley and, just take your pick. They meet with all these guys, all the guys you know of as historians, Doris Kearns Goodwin, and they're always talking about themselves and their place in history.
Yes.
And they're trying to work the historians because it's really transparent, it's transactional. They suck up to these historians, then they're going to write nice tomes about how wonderful they were. And it's totally self-obsessive. It's all narcissism from top to bottom. And it's totally disinterested in the lives of the average American.
And you know what, though, Vince, is Joe Biden just gets by with blatant lies. His State of the Union, he's going to stand up and talk about how great the economy is and how he's done this and that and lowered gas prices. And never before in history has America been this great and exceptional and so forth. I swear, if we did a drinking game out of Joe Biden's State of the Union every time he lied, we'd all be drunk by minute number 2.
No question. And the lies are so brazen. Like, for instance, he says that he's brought down the debt. He claims that the debt has come down under his administration. First of all, that's just false. The debt has gone up. He wants credit. It's such a weird bit of spin. They want credit for not passing another $1.7 trillion COVID relief package last year. So in 21, they passed one, and in 2022, they didn't send out more checks. So they say that they didn't drive the deficit up as much, so therefore they deserve credit. What kind of insane math could you possibly use? Can you imagine telling that to your parents, coming up with some harebrained, well, I didn't waste as much money this year. What? It's lunacy, and yet I can almost guarantee you that talking point will come up in the speech, where it's I drove the debt down. No, you didn't. Stop lying to the American people. They're so brazen about it, and the reason they can be brazen is because, by and large, the prevailing media infrastructure supports it. They don't fact check. They don't put the lie counter up like they tried to do with Donald Trump. They don't obsessively litigate every other word he says. It's nothing. They just give him a complete pass on so many of these things.
Yep.
Because they're fundamentally narcissistic and disinterested in what's going on with the average American as well.
I'm glad you brought up the point about the media, because I had 2 questions left to ask you, but I know our time was tight. So you already answered the one about the media. Just looking ahead then, last question, Vince. Do you see hope for America still on the horizon? And I know that there's always hope and so forth, but honestly, under this administration, I could see the next 2 years being so destructive to America, with China flying its surveillance balloons and so forth, blatantly above us. I could see America coming to a point of no return.
It's possible. So this is where the optimist in me still lies, which is it may just take a lot more darkness before people can wake up, and that could be a tough scenario because it might be too late. But I do think think about after 9/11, the sentiment in the country. Now, granted, as I said, that was taken advantage of in order to deprive people of their liberty. But at least there was some sort of common cause in America. There was some sort of common sense Americanism and kind of rooting for each other. We need that to come back for sure. Sometimes that takes a truly dramatic crisis to come to that level. I thought that the Chinese balloon thing was kind of fascinating at a broad level, because all of a sudden the American public was concerned about that. But it's also the most absurd form of Chinese surveillance that we've been subjected to. It's a very small scale relative to everything else that's been happening. I'm just like, okay, fine. Okay, the balloon, it matters. They flew over our nuclear sites. That obviously matters a lot, and we should shoot it down like well before it ever, crosses the continental United States. But meanwhile, are you aware of the amount of Chinese surveillance that's going on right now inside your own home? Like, how much, all of your technology around you is spying on you? How much access the Chinese have? That your kids have TikTok on their phones, one of the most popular apps on the planet, and the Chinese government has wholesale access to all of that data. In fact, they're basically raising your children for you. Are you aware of this? If everyone's getting all hyperventilating about the balloon, fine, but have some sense of perspective. This is the smallest iteration of this, and I'm just hopeful that the balloon thing, maybe that's the entree. Maybe that's oh wait, Chinese surveillance is bad. Wait until you find out what they're really doing.
Wow. Well, let's hope that's not the unifier in America, that China attacks us or takes us over somehow, and
You hope not.
that's what wakes up America. I like my freedom a little bit too much to let it go that far, and I know you do as well. Vince Coglianese, I want to thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. You do such a tremendous service to listeners in your area. It's great to have you on the radio, and I hope you come back on Bold and Blunt.
Thank you so much. I love it.
Vince Coglianese, he is such a great radio host. Smart, snappy, witty, insightful, all the things you want in a radio host. If you like Bold and Blunt, I want to remind you, you can get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, the online platform for your faith-based podcast. You can get Bold and Blunt, of course, at washingtontimes.com. Go there, subscribe to it, get it delivered right to your email box on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And also you can get Bold and Blunt, guess what? Wherever podcasts are offered. If you already are a subscriber to Bold and Blunt, a regular listener, thank you. It means a lot to have your support. Tune in next time, and in the meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.